Not every band is destined to last forever. Fans often love the band of brothers ideal, but the truth is that many of their assumptions about their favorite musicians only scratch the surface of the real story. Even within the Beatles, not everyone got along behind the scenes as smoothly as their public image suggested. The group worked hard to present themselves as cheeky rebels, but once the cameras were off, life together was both better and worse than fans imagined. Toward the end, John Lennon often spoke harshly about Paul McCartney, yet Paul, remembering the early days, understood that not everything John said was accurate. Still, the real tension in the band wasn't primarily between John and Paul, the so-called Nerk Twins. From the beginning, George Harrison often felt sidelined by his bandmates. Some explained it away because he was younger, but the real issue was that, compared to Lennon and McCartney's songwriting partnership, Harrison's contributions didn't come as easily, and that imbalance showed in the studio. While John and Paul seemed inseparable, George frequently felt like the younger brother just tagging along. That impression wasn't far from reality. Lennon, for example, agreed to help Harrison shape the guitar parts for Taxman, though reluctantly. Even so, he recognized George's talent. With Paul, however, the friction sometimes turned sharper. The Get Back documentary shows how many of George's frustrations were aimed at McCartney, including the famous exchange where he argues briefly with Paul before leaving the group for several days. To casual fans, it might look like George was being difficult, but in many ways he was simply reacting to Paul's controlling tendencies. Paul did admire George's abilities, yet over time he began to speak down to him more than he should have. One striking example came with Hey Jude, when Paul made him tone down his guitar solo during the song's closing section. Later, during the Abbey Road sessions, Harrison specifically asked that the bass line on something be kept simple, but Paul ignored the request and played his own part instead. Ironically, it became one of his most memorable bass lines, but George still felt as if his voice was being disregarded. Whenever Harrison brought in a strong song, the others would step back, but otherwise he often felt overlooked. By the time the band split, he seemed relieved to no longer have Paul hovering over his work or trying to shape his ideas. Even during the anthology project decades later, a trace of that old tension lingered between them, though by then it was expressed only through the occasional sharp remark. Ultimately, the two reconciled, and when Harrison passed away in 2001, Paul reflected that they had finally restored their friendship and laid old grievances to rest. Seeing the Beatles on friendly terms again was reassuring, but the Harrison-McCartney bond never quite returned to what it had once been. They would occasionally contribute to each other's records, yet the musical camaraderie that charmed audiences in A Hard Day's Night had largely faded by the early 1970s.